One is to anticipate required IT competencies and skills to attain modernized IT functions. Also, it's intended with this project to improve federal workforce efficiency and morale by outlining career paths and career opportunities. And then finally, to provide tools for managing workforce requirements that support IT modernization. This is really an extensive project, so it's actually been broken down into parts with 3 specific deliverables. Part 1 is to be a catalog of roles in IT and the overall workforce impacted by IT modernizations, as well as those emerging roles not currently in the workforce. And then part 2 of the project is to create a career path against these roles for new skills and to meet future workforce requirements. And part 3 will be to create a maturity model. That maturity model would be to help organizations develop a plan for workforce disruption. So what's happening now with the project team is we're currently partnering with the Interagency Federal Cyber Career Pathway Working Group on their reskilling framework and a playbook for agencies and individuals to use in their career development plans. So right now, the focus on the project is specifically on cybersecurity. If you have any questions or any interest in participating in this project team, please reach out. Our industry chair is actually the one who is leading this project. It's Andrew McCoy. So you want to contact Andrew directly if you have any questions. And now I will turn it over to our program chair, Austin.
Thank you, Terry. So as Sarah mentioned, my name is Austin Crittenden, and I am the program chair for our COI. And we really appreciate you joining us today. First, we have a quick housekeeping item. Please mute your device. You will have an opportunity to participate in the middle of the presentation and after, but for now, just please ensure your device is muted. I also want to provide a quick bit about our next month's programming. Effectively, we're just asking you to stay tuned. We are pivoting to a more timely topic. And given current circumstances, we anticipate this next session will also be hosted as a webinar. But please stay tuned. We'll send out details very soon. Which brings me to the introduction to today's speaker. So I'm very excited to introduce you today to today's speaker, Sarah Moffat. Sarah is a cybersecurity storyteller and evangelist. She is an expert in connecting mission and purpose to organizations using the power of compelling storytelling. Sarah has designed and executed learning and development programs across multiple federal agencies, providing learning to well over 100,000 employees. And today, we are fortunate that she will be joining us to present on the exciting topic of storytelling and cybersecurity. So without further delay, we will go ahead and let Sarah enlighten us today. I'll turn it over to Sarah.
Thank you. Imagine I'm speaking to a group of young women considering a career in technology or cybersecurity. I tell them, we need more women in the field. We need more diversity. Diversity brings innovation and creativity. There are more women than men graduating college and technical fields, and women are now taking more leadership positions. But it's still not enough. You can make a difference in the world by working at my company. Is that impactful? Now imagine if I said this. I worked at HHS when the news of the migrant children at the border broke. They were trying to unite the children with their parents, but the networks weren't working and the legislation was taking too long. And a friend of mine named Lisa, who ran the cybersecurity communications team at HHS, stepped up. She said, I've got a solution for this problem. She quickly assembled a team. They went down to the border, and over a long weekend, working all day and all night, they set up virtual networks to connect these facilities with attorneys and judges across the country so that these children's cases could be heard quickly and so that they could be reunited with their families. Lisa's tenacity and her knowledge of technology literally helped to give resolution to some of these children to get them back with their families. And that's kind of innovation that we're looking for. This is why we need more women, more minorities to come into the field of cybersecurity to help solve these humanitarian crises. Do you see the difference between these two stories? My friend Pete says, numbers tell, stories sell. And why is that? It's because you and I are hardwired for stories. Our instinct to listen to and tell stories is a survival skill. We're narrative beings, and our humanity is built on stories. It's how we make sense of the world. So what's important for today's session, for right now, for this moment, is to recognize that storytelling is an essential business skill. It's how we brand ourselves and our companies. Stories are the foundation of how our company and our organization communicate who we are and what we stand for. Stories are how we overcome barriers, including technology barriers. Telling a good story can be a critical element of bridging skills gaps or communication gaps or funding gaps, training gaps, and human gaps and understanding. I actually call storytelling the soul of technology. How we implement stories can bring fresh air and connection and community and relationship to every aspect of business. We can use stories in the C-suite and with our boards. We can use stories to talk about technology and help bring more people into the field, like I demonstrated at the beginning of this talk. The thing is that storytelling is the most ancient gatherer of people. Millions of years ago, man created fire. And while fire helped people to stay warm and allowed us to cook food, what it did was it created a place for people to gather together and make community. This ancient art is now in what's been called a business renaissance. And I want to help every single person on this call come to a point of harmony with stories. I want to empower you to find your own stories in your own voice and give you a path forward, whether you're briefing your senior leadership or trying to explain to your little granddaughter what you do at your job. Over the next hour, I'm going to share with you some of the stories and the strategies that I've learned through my training with TED at the TED Masterclass, through being the daughter of a novelist and a Secret Service systems analyst, and through over 15 years of using stories to teach. So here's a little bit of my story. I lived in a suburb of Tampa in 1981. At that point, I had a 2-year-old little brother and an infant sister. And my mom, God love her, she's a little bit intense. She was the first person to teach me never talk to strangers, which I have used countless times in cybersecurity awareness training. Never talk to strangers. That'll help you not get phished. And I know I'm saying that my mom was intense, but you might not believe me, so I'm going to elaborate. And 1981 is the year. It's the year that Adam Walsh was kidnapped from Hollywood, Florida, which is about 4 hours from where I lived. After Adam was kidnapped, my mom's intensity and primal urge to protect and defend grew exponentially. And I can clearly remember being at the grocery store with my mom and my little baby sister and my brother. And my brother was 2 years old. And if you know anything about 2-year-old boys, they're not great listeners. And no matter how many times my mom said, stay with me, stay with the grocery cart, my little brother Joseph just kept wandering off. So this one day, my mom's just at her wit's end. Joseph kept walking off. And, you know, she's terrified that he's going to be the next Adam Walsh. So he wanders off. And this time, Mom didn't say anything. She just let him get kind of far away. And then she grabbed me, put her hand over my mouth, and we hid behind one of the end aisles. And she could see Joseph from where we were hiding. And she just waited there. And she waited until he realized that he was lost. And she waited until he was in full-on meltdown mode in the middle of Winn-Dixie in Tampa, Florida, in 1981. And when he was really, really worked up and terrified, she came out. She walked over to him and said, I said, stay with me. Promise you, my brother never wandered off again. Like I said, she was intense, and she was never one to mess around with safety. So my siblings and I grew up knowing about stranger danger. We knew about all the wild, scary people in the world because my mom made sure we did. She had been around way too much in her life to ever let her kids be victims of anything. So we knew the boogeyman, and we were not afraid of him. At some point when I was around 12, my mom decided that we needed a key phrase. Like if a stranger came up to us after school and said, "Come quick, your mom's been in a car accident. She asked me to pick you up and take you to the hospital," we'd know to trust them. So the way we'd know if the stranger was a good guy was that in an event of an emergency, he'd actually say, "Hello, my name is Indigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die. Come quick, your mother's been in a car accident. She's asked me to pick you up and take you to the hospital." That's my mom. She's a novelist, she's a storyteller, and she knew about scary people. My dad worked for the Secret Service. This is a caricature of a drawing done by a Secret Service graphic artist of when my dad went on a raid for a cell phone cloning operation in 1993. I'd say that's pretty close to the beginning of cybersecurity, right? So the Secret Service was responsible for counterfeiting, which included phone cloning. And they were working with one of the cell phone companies and the local law enforcement, and they brought my dad along as the techie on site to advise them on the specifics of how the cloning operation worked. And in case you can't tell from the picture, those are floppy disks falling out of his briefcase. So my dad was the guy who wrote the code and developed the White House Access Visitor Entry System, which they still use. He also developed apps for the Secret Service, including the first nationwide imaging application used in the government, which I was very proud to say that they used when the Pope came to visit the U.S. in the 90s. And he's worked on big interface development for sites like National Missing and Exploited Children. My dad is a college dropout turned computer genius. The only certification he ever got was from Computer Learning Center in 1995. But that man can code anything, anywhere, anytime. And agents from FBI and Secret Service and just tons of people, I've heard them all talk so positively about my dad. So to me, he's this big IT superhero. And that's why I learned to speak his language. So whenever he would talk about mainframes and servers and data, I was always listening. And that queued me up perfectly to do this as my job. So now here I am. I've been building, leading, and learning and development programs for over 15 years. I love taking the super technical and making it into stories and analogies and examples that anybody can identify and absorb. I love being usually one of the only extroverts in a sea of IT introverts. I teach leadership development, storytelling, and building narratives, cybersecurity education, workforce development. I've done this all over the country because I'm constantly reading and learning and finding ways to add value to every project that I'm on. And stories are the key for me to unlock any audience. And here's what I know. Every story starts with an idea. When you tell a story, you're building the idea in the mind of your listener or the reader. You give them a reason to care about something. A story gives you permission to share, and it gives you access to someone else's curiosity. A story lets you spark something inside your listener, no matter who they are. What unites people? Armies? Gold? Flags? Story. There's nothing more powerful than a good story. Nothing can stop it. No enemy can defeat it. In business, a good story is one that creates breakthroughs, such as helping somebody imagine the future today. It creates a collective vision, which is important to the work that we're doing to help our clients as a bridge the gap between security and execution, which is true for both future products and for the services that we have now, but also for the growth of any organization. If you lose sight of your organization's story, you lose sight of who you are. Stories allow businesses and organizations and individuals to distill complexity into a compelling story that's true to who they are and provides a fresh perspective that energizes people. So a good story is going to create breakthroughs and share vision and help you keep sight of who you are and overcome complexity. And it allows you to gain influence. It lets you create narratives for people about how or why something works. So I'll give you an example. A couple years ago, I came up with a story about Little Red Riding Hood. And I used the story to talk about Little Red Riding Hood as a victim of social engineering, right? I've taken a story that everybody knows and I've applied it to the common day. Or the story I just told about Indigo Montoya and the passphrase. I can tell that today as a, hey, remember we've been using passphrases for a long time. This is how we used to do it when we were kids. So a story is also going to let you convey your brand or your message or reframe a problem or an issue. It's going to move audiences in a way that facts and figures can't. And most importantly, stories allow you to create or break trust. Think about your organization's internal stories and how those internal stories can develop or break trust just inside the organization. Let's say you wanted to hire this gal for a long time. You bring her in, she's doing great, and then after 6 months or so, you notice she's really not trying that hard anymore, and she's not really interacting in meetings, and she's not bringing her ideas anymore. And you ask her why, and you find out that even though you're pouring everything you've got into supporting her, that in the background, her teammates or the people in neighboring organizations are telling her about how corrupt the leadership is or how they really just don't care, how everybody starts with no here, and that her ideas are never going to get through. Those are the stories people tell. And so our opportunity here is to create stories that share the company values, the organization values that we want to share. The thing is that we're all using stories in some way, shape, or form, and this is our opportunity to really choose to be intentional about the kind of stories that we tell so that we can impact business positively. Whenever I think of a story, I imagine it impacting one person. And the story I told at the very beginning about Lisa and the virtual networks. In my mind, I'm telling that story to a gal that I met in an Uber. I was in San Antonio 2 years ago giving a speech, and the Uber driver's daughter was in the car doing her homework. And she was about 20 years old, Latina, and she didn't understand what cybersecurity was. So when I'm telling that story, I'm telling that story to that 20-something Latina who's trying to figure out how to make a difference in the world and make a good living. I imagine that she's maybe heard of cybersecurity but doesn't really know what it is. So my story tells her. It builds an idea inside of her that she can relate to and she can put herself in the scenario. In that story I told you about Indigo Montoya, I'm telling that story to a protective dad and helping him see how cybersecurity practices are founded on real-life things that we did when we were kids. That dad had a passphrase with his parents, and it was something only they knew. And now he gets it, and he can share that with his kids for their mobile devices. So as you're looking at this light bulb here, what's the idea that you have right now that you're trying to build in somebody else's mind? Whose mind is it? Are you trying to help your leadership understand why your department needs to move under a different leader for better alignment? Are you trying to share with your staff something that's going to help them find greater meaning and connection in their work? Once you have that idea in your mind, then you start building on it, and your ideas start bumping into each other. So where do your ideas come from? If I had a nickel for every person who said, oh, I'm just not creative, I just don't get ideas like you, Sarah, I think that's malarkey. We all have ideas. The thing is that we don't catch them. So I know that you've been standing in the shower before and all of a sudden you're like, oh, that's how I solved that problem. Or you're talking with your friends and all of a sudden you get an idea. So ideas come from recurring patterns, these slow hunches that take time and they're evolving in the background. And then maybe a couple small hunches bunch together and they become a bigger hunch, or half an idea takes its time and it becomes a full idea. Or maybe you're talking with somebody over lunch and you have this like aha moment. You're exchanging ideas. Or maybe you're just sitting there watching TV or listening to a podcast, and all of a sudden you get this idea. You can borrow other people's ideas and combine them with your own, like I did with Little Red Riding Hood. That Beth Corin over at GSA, she says when you take somebody else's great idea and you build on it and you prove it, that's called innovation. So there's some innovation. I recommend keeping an idea log. I know you have ideas. Like I said, the objective is just to catch them. And that's something I learned through the TED Masterclass. Create a notepad or Evernote on your phone and jot down ideas when you have them, or you can go lo-fi and carry around a notebook. But when you say, I never think of anything new, I know that's poppycock. We've all got ideas. The deal is to catch your ideas. Some of your ideas are going to be weird and probably unactionable. That's okay. But some of them are worth nurturing. And once you have a good seed idea, what you want to do is you want to allow it to grow through hunches and colliding with others and talking to other people. And until it grows into more than just a seed idea, it becomes what's called your through line. And that's when you start thinking about how to tell it as a story. Crafting a clear and captivating through line is probably one of the most critical steps in developing a story. What is the exact, precise idea you want to build in your listener's mind? What's their takeaway? How are you going to express yourself in a way that's going to draw them in? You might even think about how someone else might express your idea to someone if they were to share your story. Like, oh, I heard Sarah talking about blah, blah, blah. Your story needs to make sense within the context of the through line. Or if I say it a different way, your through line gives your story context. So for my story earlier about Lisa, my through lines might have been this. How cybersecurity can restore separated families. Or using technology to reunite children with their parents. Or, how about this? Minority women solve critical humanitarian issues through technology and tenacity. When I think about how you'll tell that story about Lisa, you might not remember her name. You might not remember that I worked at HHS. But what you will remember was how a woman used her technical and leadership skills to get migrant children access to attorneys and judges so they could be reunited with their parents. That's my idea. That's the idea I built inside of you through my story. Now, the next time you think about innovation and diversity, you're going to remember that story. And maybe you'll even use it with your leadership to talk about speaking at a historically Black college to recruit for your next batch of interns. Or I don't know how you're going to use it, but I know that I built that idea in there. So the hook, right? We've heard of a hook. There's a hook in a song, hook in a play, a hook in a book. The hook is what gets you. This is the Blues Travel. The hook brings you back. Your through line is your hook. It's the connecting theme that ties together your narrative. So for my masterclass with TED, my through line was modern mentoring, how to create a round table as legendary as King Arthur's. There's a difference between a good through line and a bad one. So here's one. Here's one. You tell me what you think. I want to tell you some experiences I had in college, and then I'm going to tell you what I learned from them. Okay, there's a through line. What about this one? When I was in college, I learned a lot about persistence and endurance. Let me share with you two experiences I had that taught me the most. See the difference? Your through line is going to trace your story's path and make sure you're not taking any big leaps or missteps. So to figure out your through line, right? So you've got your idea, and now you're creating a through line. You want to make sure that you know as much as you can about your audience, that one person that you're talking to, even though it might be a lot of people, but focusing on that one person makes a difference. And also make sure that your idea can be unpacked and delivered to that person's brain in the amount of time you have. If you only have 2 minutes to pitch, your through line needs to pack a punch. So remember, you want to think about how the other person is going to retell your story when you're not there. What are their takeaways? So as you are developing your through line and you're building this idea in your own mind, you need to remember to know your audience, right? Don't try to pack things in. Don't rush. Figure out why what you're saying matters. And make sure you've got some real examples there. Always cut back. Cover less for greater impact. Right? You might think, oh, I have this great idea. I can tell this story, this story, this story. I can give this slide, put up this example. Okay, cut back. Cover less, greater impact. Let your through line help you filter out a lot of what you might not say, what you might otherwise say. And I also learned from my TED Masterclass, your through line should be about 15 words or less. So as you're developing your through line, as you're developing your idea, think about this. Is this a topic or an idea or a story you're passionate about? If you're not, maybe you're not the right person to tell the story. Maybe you tell the story to somebody else and have them tell it. Is what you're talking about going to inspire curiosity? And there's a way to build that into your story. Here is a great question to ask. Is your story a gift or an ask? Listen, we are creative, curious people, and we like to have new ideas. And it's not an ask if you're saying, I'm asking for more, if your idea is to get more money so you can build a new program. I'm saying, are you taking away from someone or are you giving them something? Are you giving them an idea, a new way to look at something, a new perspective? Are you giving them the opportunity to engage with the story, to engage with you? Then that's a gift. But if you're not prepared and your story's choppy and you've built a deck with 1,000 slides and 1 million words on each, like that's an ask. You're taking away from somebody. Is your story fresh or is the information already out there? I mean, there's nothing new under the sun, right? Everything has already been said before. But what makes it fresh is how you say it and your delivery. So make sure you know what you're going to do that's going to set it apart. Can you explain your story well and your idea well in the time you have available? Are you going to be able to make this worth your own time and your listeners' time? Because here's the thing, guys and gals. Putting together a really good presentation, a really good story is time consuming. It's not just, off the top of your head. You've got a lot of questions to ask. And the thing is that once you build your story really well, you can use it so many times. And then the last question is, am I credible to tell the story? Am I the right person for this? You need to be the right person for it. Once you've got your solid through line, I want you to practice it, right? So when I started doing my TED Masterclass, I had, I think, probably 8 or 9 different through lines that I would say to somebody and they would go, oh, okay. And then when I finally got it in, now I can tell you every time I say my through line to somebody, the person says, oh, that sounds really interesting. Or, oh, how do you create a round table as legendary as King Arthur's? Right? So practice your through line. Make sure it's getting that reaction you want. Plan your story for the audience of one, right? If you can find somebody similar to that audience to practice on, even better. If you're delivering your story as part of a presentation to a request or a board, or a request to a board, or especially, oh my Lord, if you're delivering it to children, make sure you practice. Record yourself, listen to yourself, look for ways to cut back. So I'm going to tell you this really quick. So 2 years ago, a little more than 2 years ago, I decided that I was going to do a TED Talk, right? I set this goal in my mind. I'm going to do a TED Talk. A couple weeks later, I happened to be at a conference where TED happened to be there, and they happened to be announcing that they were launching this alpha program called TED Masterclass, and people could apply to speak or to participate, but it was for companies only. So I applied on behalf of the organization that I was with at the time, and they accepted my application. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people applied, and they accepted mine. And then about a week before the masterclass was supposed to kick off, my leadership just wasn't buying into it, and I was told, hey, you can do this on your own, but you can't do this on behalf of the organization. So I went to the TED folks, and I got down on my virtual hands and knees and just begged them, please, 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 let me do this. And they made an exception. So I was the only non-company, non-organization to participate. And I was up there with GE and Verizon and Toys R Us and Pepsi and just these humongous companies, and then little old Schmerish Moffat, as I like to say. And out of all of the applications and out of all of the training that we did over all of the weeks, They selected 3 people to come to New York City, to their TED office headquarters, in front of the audience with the cameras to deliver their TED Talk. So two folks were invited to do partial talks, and one person was invited to do their whole talk, and I was that one person. So my original talk was 22 minutes. They asked me to cut it back 4 minutes, and I did. And a week before the TED event, they asked me to cut it back again. And I cried, but I did it, and it was made better. So always cut back, guys. That's my story for cutting back. So basic storytelling tips. Number 1, we've already talked about this. You've got to know your audience. Check. Identify the idea you want to share with them. Check. Identify the challenge that might get in the way of the goal, right? So this is part of your story. So think through challenges that might get in the way of your goal. And then that's what we're talking about now. So the goal was to reunite children with their parents in the story I told earlier. Find a character who overcame that challenge. In my example, it was Lisa, right? And then make sure there's a resolution to your story. This is super important. Don't leave folks hanging. You don't want to do that. A good story needs to have an idea. Minority women solve critical humanitarian issue through technology and tenacity. Needs to have a character, that's Lisa. Needs to have a goal, reuniting children with their parents. The challenge, overcoming bureaucracy and bad technology. The resolution, instilled a network and got kids to have their cases heard and decided, reunited with their family. So those are the tenets of a good story. So now I want to break it down. I'm going to stop here for a breather, and I'd like for you guys to come off mute because I want to have a little chat, if you don't mind, because the promise of this session was to talk about the impact stories can have in business. You're the one that has to make the impact. So can you think right now, just based on how we talked about the idea forming and developing your through line, can you think of how you might tell a story to recruit or at a speaking event, or what kind of ideas you might want to impart to your leadership or your board, things that facts and figures just haven't been working for you. So anybody have an idea right now that they want to share, or let's chat about it for a few minutes?
Hey, Sarah, this is Austin. I, tangentially related to that, I was really curious if you have a storyteller that inspired you, or that a mentor who inspired you and kind of helped you along with your learning about storytelling, given, your wonderful expertise about telling stories. Do you have any examples in that context?
Well, yes. So I mentioned earlier that my mom, when you are the daughter of a published novelist, you hear stories a lot. So I used to make a joke that when I was homeschooled in middle school, my mom made me diagram sentences at breakfast time, and that's not made up. That's for real. So I learned about storytelling young, but also I've watched hundreds of TED Talks, and I've read the TED book, and I've read so many storytelling books because I really do think that storytelling is in a business renaissance, and I think it's a critical skill for every leader to have, honestly. So yeah. You ever watch Brene Brown's first TED Talk? You could tell she was kind of nervous, but she was like feeling herself. That one's a really good one to watch for a virtual mentor. Has anyone here ever given a really good, told a really good story in an executive meeting that worked well?
I don't want to step on any toes, as Austin again, but in your prompt, it made me think about myself. I work at the Treasury Department, and we work in our office to provide financing to end projects. And in that event, our mission is to be able to finance and help fund these end projects, say renewable energy projects. So our mission is to make sure that the funding is provided so that these important projects on the ground are completed. And the story is told when you look at these buildings and projects in person and on site to see from paper to practice what actually was completed through our agency. And that's really our story, and something that you really compelled me to think about when you were speaking earlier.
Yeah, for sure. And Austin, here's another thing that you can do is you can bring those stories back to your staff meetings. Take some pictures next time you're on site. And if you can somehow draw the line of the person who helped to impact that's on your team, like, hey, Joe, I know you were the one that processed the blah, blah, blah that led to blah, blah, blah. Here's the end result. Then Joe ends up becoming part of that story. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. He can tie himself directly to, and that happens a lot, especially with the federal government. You know, we're here protecting, defending, uplifting, serving, healing, whatever, the American public, but we're down so many levels in the bureaucratic hierarchy that it's impossible most of the time to touch something tangible that we worked on. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And you know, if you work for a company, I don't know, maybe you got profit sharing, maybe you get something that's a little more tangible, but you know, so being able to build, and that's part of the culture, is to be able to share those stories in the context of where you're working.
Right.
So I think that's great, Austin. I'm just going to give somebody else an opportunity to speak, and then we'll move on. Anybody else want to share a great story or an idea or a question?
Yeah, this is Craig Petrin. Can you hear me?
Yep, I sure can.
Yeah, just what I've noticed with stories when I've used storytelling is it was much more effective when I made it a little personal. Somehow I worked it into a part of what I've done. I was doing a TED Talk, and I'm used to being very academic and laying out facts, and I thought it was really good. And when I went through the trial, they go, oh my God, that's an academic lecture. And so I had to recraft it and build it around something that was meaningful to me. And then once I was able to do that, I was able to emotionally connect with the people.
100%. That's a great point. That goes back earlier to, are you the right person to tell the story? You've got to be emotionally invested in it. It's a great point. Thank you for sharing that.
And Sarah, this is Terry Schaefer. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. You go ahead.
So mine is more of a question too. So if you have to present to your executive leadership and you're presenting an idea and you've got all of the data, you have the graphics, you have everything it kind of supports and shows them what you're trying to convey, but you're trying to use a story to make it more impactful. How do you do that and ensure it's right and they're not going to be turned off by you bringing a personal story into it? How do you make sure that it's appropriate? How do you kind of go through that process to figure that out?
Well, you make sure it's tied to your through line, but that's the biggest thing. So I'm not going to tell a story about, the time that my son was sick if I'm trying to secure funding for new servers, right? That's not going to work. But do you remember at a meeting that we had for that working group last year, I did tell the story about how many times my son fell off of his bike. And I said, listen, we've had some trial and errors here, but all the best bike riders fall down. You have to fall down in order to learn. And so we might have fallen down a few times, but now we're riding steady. We know how to turn around, so I think there are ways for you to work in even a small metaphor or an analogy. That might be something easier for you to do initially than to do a full-blown story. But I know that there are things in your personal life that do tie into what you're doing in your business, because we're people and that's just how we are. So does that help at all?
Yes, absolutely. So it's just creating that connection, creating that interest.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to talk about next. So that was a good segue, right? So we've talked about how we have ideas, right? And Terry, that's what you were just saying. Like, you have this idea of this message, this presentation you want to give. Start thinking about what's your through line. What's the idea that you want them to walk away with? What's the gift that you're giving them? And I'm guessing that some story ideas might present themselves if you start to think about, what do they know? What don't they know? Who are they? What are they going to say about this later? And you'll get an idea for a story when you start to ask yourself those questions, which is what we're going to talk about now. When you're looking at your audience, who you're going to be sharing your idea or your presentation, your story with, always start with these questions. You've asked yourself some of these questions before, but once you get your idea grown and you're clear on your through line, I want you to revisit some of these and build from there. So knowing your audience is critical. Also important is knowing, what do you want to leave behind? How do you want them to feel? Part of telling a story is about influence. It's about using your influence, gaining influence, giving influence. The best way I know to be influential is to be incredibly purposeful with how you want your audience to feel. If you walk into a meeting or a talk and you think to yourself, I want them to feel inspired, that's inside how you speak. So just as an aside, this is a wonderful practice for you to do before you go into any meeting or encounter any person. If you walk into that meeting, and I learned this from Brendan Burchard, he said every time he walks through a doorway into a meeting or into an encounter, he thinks to himself, how do I want this person to feel right now? And it guides you. And that is such a powerful thing. So as you're walking into your presentation, as you're developing it, how do you want them to feel? I have some clear intentions about how I want you guys to feel. Not what I want you to do, but how I want you to feel during this presentation. And you also want to ask, what's your call to action? This is one of the most important pieces of your story. Whether it's overt or implied, you want to give people a call to action. So I'm going to use the story of the Good Samaritan. I think everybody knows this story regardless of their religious affiliation. So at the end of the story, Jesus asks, which of the three people do you think was the best neighbor to the man in need? And the people responded, the one who was merciful. And Jesus said this. He said, go and do the same thing. Great call to action. That's the leave behind for your story. Be the merciful one. Go and do. It's powerful. There's a reason that story has been told over and over and over again. So what about the leave behind for the story I told earlier, the Networks on the Border story? The leave behind was essentially this. We need tenacious women to bring technology skills, right? The call to action, join us. Sometimes your call to action is more subtle, but sometimes it's really specific. You've got to decide what the right approach is for you. Did you guys ever see My Big Fat Greek Wedding? There's a scene where they're trying to figure out how to get Gus to let the main character, whose name I can't think of right now, do something. And the mother, she says, we have to make him think it's his idea. She says the wife, or the husband, he is the head, but the wife, she is the neck. And she can turn the head whichever way she wants. When you're telling a story, you're the wife. You're trying to turn the head, right? And you're going to try to use either overt or kind of covert influence and get them to turn their head. This is the direction I want you to go. And always be thinking about that, which is not manipulative, by the way, guys. It's just you're trying to get them to reason to do something that you want them to do, and you've got the reason, and you're going to back it up, right? So when you are developing your story, right, you want to be thinking about your opening line. So go listen to some TED Talks. People there don't usually start off by saying, my name is so-and-so, and I'm this prestigious, blah, blah, blah. They just start in. And their opening lines are usually pretty epic. Your opening line, how you start off, is going to set the stage. Go ahead, let it be emotional. Let it be a good kickoff to a story. Let it be something that people are going to go, oh, to, right? So when I started, I said I worked at HHS when the news broke about the children being separated from their parents at the border. That's a strong opening. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. One of my all-time favorites, Metamorphosis by Kafka. When Gregor Samsa woke up one morning from unsettling dreams, he found himself changed in his bed into a monstrous vermin. Powerful opening. So what's your big opener for your talk, for your idea? What do you want to tell a story with a moral? Or are you going to explain it? So, for example, Little Red Riding Hood doesn't have a moral. It's implied. My story about the networks at the border, I can actually change the moral for that story depending on where I deliver it. I did the same thing with my roundtable TED Talk. Sometimes I focus on how we all need to reach out and build networks. Sometimes I focus on how your roundtable can establish you as a great leader. When I talk to cybersecurity leaders specifically on that, I talk about reaching out to other CISOs and other people in your field and building a really strong roundtable of people that can help you look into the future together. Sometimes I focus on the journey of the roundtable together, and I bring in examples of other roundtables like Jesus and the Disciples or Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, right? But you need to know from the beginning, what's your moral, what's your through line as it relates to your idea, and then you develop your opener and your closer. And your through line guides you through the middle. So you've got your idea, you've got your through line, you've got your audience questions in mind. Now it's time to prepare your actual story, Carrie, that pertains to your talk or your presentation. Your stories are integral to that part. Your story provides the proof or the example or the metaphors for what you're trying to get across. So a successful explanation is building your idea in someone else's mind, step by step. Our minds want to take in new ideas, and so your job as the storyteller or presenter is to stoke someone's curiosity while you're giving them the explanation. You don't want to make any big leaps. You want to take it one step at a time, building your idea with each step. You want the listener, you want the listener to be curious, right? You want them at some point to experience a knowledge gap. Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, I wonder how she's going to explain that one. Oh, what's she going to say next? I didn't know that had anything to do with this, right? You're building some curiosity in there. The story part of your presentation is going to simulate an experience for your listener and allow him to feel something. That's where your story is the strongest, where you encourage your listener to feel something, whether it's curiosity or fear, excitement or anger or whatever. Well, maybe not anger, but this is where you provide the proof for your talk. Your story is the proof to your point, or one of them. If you're good at metaphors, definitely try to work in a metaphor, which is essentially what I did with the Little Red Riding Hood story, right? So for those of you who don't know it, I tell the story of Little Red Riding Hood, right? Her mommy says, Red, stay on the path. Do not leave the road. Go straight to Grandma's house. Don't talk to anybody. Path, road, don't talk to anybody, Grandma's house. So Red heads down the road. She meets the wolf. The wolf is like, hey, what's up? How's it going? He asks her some questions. She reveals that she's going to Grandma's. And he's like, hey, you know what? Those flowers in that field over there are really pretty. I bet that your sick grandmother would love to have some of those beautiful flowers. And so Red picks some flowers. Meanwhile, Wolf goes to her house, eats Grandma. So what I do at that point is I say, this is social engineering. The wolf just socially engineered Red. She knew exactly what she was supposed to do, and he manipulated her. That's all social engineering is. It's manipulation. Don't you think your grandmother would love those beautiful flowers? Don't you want to find out what happens next to this kitten who's hanging on to a rope? Click this link, right? That's all social engineering is. That's what phishing is. And in the process, the wolf managed to get her PII and her grandmother's PHI in the process. So I've used a quick metaphor to explain social engineering, and people get it, right? So that makes my point. It helps build an idea in people's minds. So your metaphor or your story can be the aha for your listener. This can be the critical point in your story, in your talk, the story right there. So as you're thinking about how to explain your idea and thinking of your story, make sure you assess if the core of your story is explaining a new idea. And this goes back to knowing your audience. If you're explaining something new, a metaphor or a story will definitely help. I heard one guy talk about, or actually it was a gal talking about JavaScript. And she said, in a regular computer program, your computer follows lines of instructions one at a time in a specific sequence. But in JavaScript, line 5 doesn't necessarily always come after line 4. So she said, imagine this. Imagine if you could put on your shoes before your jeans, or your jeans before your underwear. That's possible in JavaScript, right? Great simple metaphors so that people understand the order of things. And so the last thing to keep in mind here is the curse of knowledge. That's what Chris Anderson from TED calls the curse of knowledge, is when we forget what it's like not to know something. When I first started contracting at DoD many, many years ago, I didn't understand a daggone thing anybody was saying for like 3 months, because they all talk in jargon and abbreviations and military lingo, and it's baffling. So when you're building your talk, try to do it without any jargons or acronym. And remember that jargons and acronyms only clarify things for people who are already aligned with your level of understanding. So let's recap. You have an idea. There's a message you want to convey. You develop a through line. You figure out information about your audience. You know what you want to leave behind. You know how you want to make them feel, and then you start building your explanation. How are you going to explain your idea? Well, a big part of that is going to be your story. How you shape your story depends on what your audience already knows and what they need to know. And you build your story in a way that's going to let your audience feel something. You want them to experience that knowledge gap, that curiosity to know more. So build your story and your explanation step by step. Build on curiosity. Let your story be the proof of your idea or your concept. And remember the curse of knowledge, which is try to remember what it's like before you knew this thing and put yourself in the mind of the listener. Okay? So now we're going to look at persuasion and influence. Those elements of building something into someone else's mind, whether that person is your stubborn manager or the person who always starts with no, or a resistant board member, or somebody who just really needs to be able to share your idea too to build consensus. There are tons of ways and reasons to build influence and to practice influence and persuasion. Persuasion is basically convincing your audience that the way they see the world isn't exactly right. It's okay, because you want them to see it the way you want them to see it for your reason, right? So part of your story's challenge is to take apart the pieces of their beliefs that don't work and create something new or better. And you do this by priming or nudging someone in your direction. If you go straight to the point, it can be abrasive or abrupt. So what you want to do is find or develop stories that are going to help nudge someone and help them feel the way you want them to feel without saying, please feel this way. The story allows them to put themselves in the shoes of the character and lets them feel emotions. Remember, our brains want new ideas. So this is a gift. Remember, we talked earlier about whether what you're saying is a gift or a take. Make sure your story is a gift. So I saw a TED Talk about a guy who was saying that too many choices make us unhappy. Well, geez, as Americans, we love having choices because we think that lots of choices bring lots of freedom. But then he tells the story about going jeans shopping. And he says to the clerk, I need a new pair of jeans. And then she says, okay, what kind of jeans? Skinny jeans, boot cut, flare, button down, or zip up? Do you want dark wash, light wash, acid wash, stone wash? How many pockets do you have? Do you want regular fit or relaxed fit? He said, my jaw dropped at all the options. And I told the clerk, I want the kind of jeans that used to be the only kind of jeans you could buy. In that story, in less than 30 seconds, he's given you a tiny nudge toward the belief that maybe you might be right. And maybe You like having that tiny bit of belief, don't you? Right? That's persuasion. What I've learned about persuasion and influence is that it starts with acknowledging what you think people already know. And since you know what your audience thinks or believes about something to a certain degree, you should have a pretty good idea. So you're going to affirm what they already know, right? I know this has been a tough year. I know we've been really struggling with this. Or, I know that we think that we really need a lot of choices. And then you hit them with what they might aspire to. In this case, a world with fewer choices. Or, but wouldn't it be great if this thing happened? And then finally, you hit them with the affect. That's the emotion. That's the story. That's when you tell the gene story. Once someone is primed, you get them more open to your idea. And after that, you can start to bring your idea through the reason stage. Reason creates a level of certainty for your listener. So you could use an if-then-else approach, right? If this is true, then this must be true. You can also create a big mystery, which is really fun, right? Where you ask a question in the beginning. Do you think that we're a world where we like more choices or less choices? Do you think choices stress us out? And then through your stories and through the information you give, you rule out possibilities one by one until the listener lands on your conclusion with you. It's really fun because you're basically taking them on a journey with you. And it's very interesting for them. And it's pretty daggone persuasive. So remember, logic might convince someone. Numbers can tell, but it's not going to energize them. It's not going to help them emote. And your stories are going to bring the energy and the emotion to whatever it is you're trying to do or sell or fix or develop. I can say, we have a real culture problem in this organization. Our vacancy rate is 23%. Our turnover rate is 16%. The last engagement survey said over 30% of employees didn't think their supervisors care about them. We've got to do something about this. Well, why? Why do we have to do something about it? What do you suggest? What are we going to do? Does it really make a difference? We're all fed. Most of us aren't going to leave. We've tried to fix this before. It didn't work, right? So see, they've got a lot of reasons for believing what they believe, for not doing anything. So you got to persuade them. You can start off by telling a story about how you visited XYZ agency on their Cultural Awareness Day and how you felt when you were there. Maybe share a couple statistics. We've got a pretty high turnover rate. And a lot of the employees think that their bosses don't care about them. But wouldn't it be great if we came about this differently this time? I know we've tried some stuff in the past, acknowledging, affirming, right? But we know more now. And I was talking with Andrew the other day. Then you can tell a story about how culture is really adversely impacting Andrew and his team and what he's doing with his team to overcome it. Then you could tell another story about how you felt when you first came in and maybe how that's changed. And then you can talk about some reasons for improvement. What will happen if the culture gets better? What will happen if it gets worse? Take them on that discovery. And then in the end, you can ask them, maybe even challenge them. Are we ready to step up and do something about this? I am. And I believe we have what it takes to get it done, not just for us, but for Andrew and his team and for the folks out there that really want to do a good job and just feel good about coming to work. Other ways that you can add persuasion to your presentation or your story is to add humor. Humor is great. Personal anecdotes, tie this to yourself personally. Use great graphics.
Hey, Sarah, are you still with us? This is Austin. I can't hear you.
I lost her audio too.
All right, guys, just give us one moment as we try and get Sarah back online.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your patience, guys. Just give us one moment here. We're reaching out to Sarah. Nancy, would you mind sending a chat message to see if Sarah can pick that up to let her know that we can't hear her mic?
Yeah, I did. I sent 3 messages to her already to let her know that her audio's gone out.
I see. Thank you. Hey, I see your chat message, Camille. Yes, please go ahead and text her. I just texted her as well, but I appreciate your help.
Okay.
Thanks again, everyone, for your patience. We'll just give it a minute or two. If we can't get her online, we'll go ahead and close it out. But if she does come on the next minute or so, we'll go ahead and switch to Q&A.
Y'all, I'm sorry. Where did I leave off?
Hi, welcome back, Sarah.
Thanks for all the text messages. I'm like,
there were
on. Where?
several slides back. There were several.
Oh, dang.
Proceed through.
Are we here? Did we do persuasion and influence?
We were on that slide, I believe, and just moving to the next one. Is that correct? Let's see. Go to the next one. It was somewhere in there.
One? All right. Well, I said what I wrote on this slide, so I'm gonna let you read it. And I said what I said on this slide, so I'm gonna let you read it. Right? 63% of people remember the stories. Only 5% remember statistics. So don't talk in statistics. Tell a good story. That's basically what I was saying. Golly day, I'm so sorry that we missed so much of this. Okay, so I'll go here again and say, I've given you guys a ton of information and possibilities for implementation, but the big takeaway is tell stories. Maybe the first ones you tell aren't going to be as great as a published TED Talk, and that's totally okay. Don't wait to be a perfect storyteller to tell your first story, because you're going to get better every time. In the meantime, every time you tell a story, you help to build an idea in someone else. You're helping to make an emotional connection and build authenticity and relationship and community. Stories impact business because we are people and we're hardwired for stories. Stories add meaning and depth to what we do, and they change hearts and minds. The key is to catch your ideas. We all have ideas. Catch them and write them down. Let them bump into other ideas. Share them with colleagues. Hey, what if the next time we meet with the board, we share the story about the time when XYZ happened, and we could use that story to help them understand why we need to start to change our business plan, or why our strategy needs to be updated. Read stories. One of the greatest ways to read tell stories is to read other people's stories. Right? Read about how other organizations are pitching AI to their staff. Read a story about how a file clerk at Verizon went through an upskilling program because Verizon is being super transparent about the jobs that are being phased out. And so she took Verizon up on their offer to reskill her, and she's now an entry-level IT consultant making $20,000 a year and growing her skills. Right? People want to hear stories. They want to be engaged. They want to be captivated. They're curious. We're hardwired for stories, so not telling stories is actually doing us a disservice. Engage people, and don't be afraid to engage emotions at work. Curiosity is an emotion, right? Happiness is an emotion. You want to build that in the way that you're working. And think of the ways that you can build relationship and connections through a story, through your authenticity. It is definitely powerful, and it is certainly impactful. So I'm going to give you guys just a couple quick examples, right? So here's one. The impact would be non-technical leaders, right? So let's say you need to explain why your CISO office needs increased funding. First of all, don't use jargon, right? Second, what's your idea? And start to ask questions. What do you know about the C-level execs? Do any of them have a background in technology? Could any of them be helpful in persuading others once you're out of the room? Why do they care? What's in it for them? What is your through line? What stories can you tell to help build the idea in your mind? And if they're familiar stories, great. What method of reason are you going to use? Are you going to use if then else? Are you going to take them on a journey? What is the feeling you want them to have? What should they be curious about? What's the part in your talk where you want them to go, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, that's new information. Always remember the kind of influence you're working towards and your call to action. What do you want them to do at the end? When I was first starting out, that was the thing I always forgot to do. And my mentor called me out on it hardcore. I thought that I gave the best talk ever. It was actually up at Social Security Administration a couple of years ago. And I brought my mentor with me because I was sure that I was giving the best talk ever. Isn't that so? Well, you don't know me, but that's so me. But anyway, when we left, I said, what did you think about it? She said, it was really good, except you forgot to ask them to do anything with the information you gave them. And I was like, ah. So practice your talk and your stories. Decide what visuals you're going to use. Make sure you've got a great opener. Figure out, are you going to do a moral or explain the takeaway? Okay. What if you're trying to talk to your leadership about adding a cyber apprenticeship program in your organization? Again, skip the jargon. What's the idea? Who are the deciders? Is there a chain of command you need to get through? Who are they? Why does this matter to your organization? How will it adversely impact the organization if they do not do it? How much is it going to cost? How long is it going to take? What are their reasons to say no? What's the through line? What stories can help you build the idea in their mind? What method of reason are you going to use? How can you build curiosity into your listeners about this topic? And use stories to overcome their faulty reasoning, right? Because most companies are going to think this is going to be too hard, it's going to be too expensive, these kids are going to leave as soon as we're done training them, right? So they've got reasons. Your job is going to be to overcome those reasons. Remember to think about the influence, visuals, anecdotes. If you've got other companies that have done it successfully, did they get some awards? Were they recognized for promoting diversity and inclusion? Open with a story that's perfect. If you need a story about apprenticeships, let me know. I've got a billion. And with a call to action, definitely on this one. Make sure that your through line is powerful. How about for kids, right? What's your idea? If you want to teach cybersecurity in the schools or or something like that. You know, why do the kids care about cyber? Is it going to make their life better? How are they going to implement it? What makes it interesting? Can you think about this through the lens of a kid? So when I was doing, I'm developing a series of stories for kids with a cybersecurity superhero. And for months, every time I went into a restaurant or a place where there were kids, I would ask them, do you know about cybersecurity? What do you think your ideal superhero would look like if she was a regular person? And by asking those questions and what does your mom say about cyber, I really got into the mind because I needed to overcome the curse of knowledge, right? I think I know what kids think, but let them tell me what they think. What's the through line of your talk and how's it going to grab a kid's attention? What stories can you tell? How are you going to capitalize on the innately curious mind of a child? Remember, when you're talking to kids, use a call to action and remember your through line is something that they can remember. Think you and only you can prevent forest fires. Dare to keep kids off of drugs. The more you know. Won't you be my neighbor? Use visuals and movements and opportunities. Open with the story. I mean, who doesn't love a good once upon a time beginning, right? And with kids, definitely give them that call to action, that through line. So those are some examples of ways that you can be practically impactful using stories in a variety of settings, okay? So I just want you to be thinking about that type of thing. And so I'm just going to be quiet for 1 second while you're processing this information. I'm going to tell you something. I woke up in a hospital bed, and at first I had no idea where I was. I was in unbearable pain, and I thought to myself, did I get in a car accident? And then I remembered, no, I chose to have this surgery. I chose this pain to have a new healthy life. In the pain I had at that moment, I remembered that anything worth having is an uphill climb. I knew the pain was eventually going to go away, and that I had a lot of hard work ahead of me, but I also had a goal, and I could see that goal clearly in my mind. And I'll tell you what, knowing that my destiny was on the other side of that pain and that suffering I had was enough to pull me through. My through line for that story is the toughest decision I ever made gave me a new life. Personal story. What can I do with that story? I could use it to talk about cultural change in my organization and how tough it is. Nobody likes change. It's painful and it's uncomfortable, but it's important if you want to grow. I can use it at a health conference and talk about how life changes are hard and giving up old habits are painful but necessary for a new life. I can use it at a workshop in my company, my organization about goal setting and how having the vision clearly in your mind is critical to getting past hurdles and hard faces. Once you have a good story in your mind, there are so many ways that you can apply it. And there's a million ways I can apply this story, but in all of them, I'm going to use it to convey my own humanity, to admit a frailty of mine, to tell you that I struggle and I'm a human just like the rest of us, and it's going to link us and it's going to bind us together so that you can emote with me. And I've sparked your curiosity. And I'm going to use it to build an idea inside of you that something you're doing right now, a project you're working on, something you're dealing with at home is hard, but it's worth it. That's an impact. That's how storytelling can impact business. That's how it can impact every person that you're talking to. So we're ending this call here in a minute, and here's an idea for a personal brainstorming session for you. Spend 2 minutes creating an idea log of some ideas that you had during this talk or that you've been thinking about lately. And then spend a couple minutes thinking of some through lines for those stories. Share some of your best ones with someone you trust. And then once you get some feedback, pick the best ideas and start thinking about what's your through line? What's your call to action? What are you leaving behind? What's the feeling you want them to have? How can you influence them? And let your ideas collide with each other. I'm going to go here really quick. I want you to take time to be creative. You need to create that space in your life. So set up your creative time, whether it's once a week or twice a week. But Dan Pink in his book When, he says to tackle analytical problems in the morning and save your creative pursuits for later in the afternoon or the early evening. So, when you're getting your 2 p.m. latte, maybe spend 15 minutes as your creative time to jot down your ideas. Here's some things that I'd like everybody to do right now, and this is fresh in your mind. And we're just going to be quiet for 2 minutes. This is the 5-second rule, in case you haven't read Mel Robbins' book. She says, if you've got an impulse to act on something, you've got to do something about it within 5 seconds, or your brain's going to kill the idea. So what are you going to do right now with your ideas to help your kids' school, or talk to your boss, or do a presentation for work, or improve your company's culture using stories? How are you going to improve your next presentation with stories? How are you going to connect authentically with your story, with your audience? Take a minute right now and just in your phone or your computer, jot down some ideas or send yourself an email with action steps you're going to take. Are you going to send your kid's school an email to volunteer? Are you going to help a teacher? Are you going to hold a staff meeting next week with your team and start to collect their stories? You can share them in a bigger meeting about the impact your organization is making. Figure out what you can do to make massive impact in your role using connection, relationship, and persuasion that comes from a good story. Write it down. 1 minute. Impact requires action. If you want to make an impact in your life, at your job, you've got to do something. Okay? So this call is going to get recorded. You can go back and rewatch it. You can email me. You can send me a text, whatever. But do something with this. I know you've got ideas. And I want you to let those ideas grow into stories. And I want you to practice telling those stories and watch your influence grow. Watch the impact in your business and your organizations. Watch the ripple effect that comes through doing such a human thing like gathering around a fire and building relationships, building your idea in somebody else's mind. Big business impact, big human impact. Those ideas are all inside of you, and I want you to act on them. The end.
Thank you, Sarah, for the insightful. Thank you very much for the insightful and contemplative presentation. I learned a lot today, and I bet the wider audience did as well. In the next couple of minutes, I did want to allow the participants, if they had any questions or comments, to please go ahead and raise them now. And if you had any ideas that you jotted down during the exercises, you can bring that up as well. But if anyone has any feedback, I'll open it up for a moment to take those questions or feedback. not hearing a question, I want to again thank Sarah for the fantastic presentation. I do want to note to the participants to please stay tuned for information about our next event. As Sarah mentioned, this will be recorded and published online. We'll provide the slides as well. I think there's a wealth of information in the slide deck, and I'm sure I'm going to go back through the slides to go back over some of my notes because that was fantastic. So again, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And Nancy, Terry, unless there's anything else, I think we're good to close out today.
Sounds good.